Hey there, this is Douglas Ferguson. I'm here with Karen Holst.
Hi, authors of Start Within.
Yeah, and this is our weekly go live session with a innovation doer. We do these every Friday just to highlight the awesome work that people are doing out there in the world, and most of them are readers of Start Within or implying the principles. Some are just have found their way to this work themselves, and we're just celebrating our shared understanding and our love for this work. So today we have Joe Meersman. Joe is the Vice President of Growth and Strategy at Voltage Control and spent many years at IBM working on the design organization that they built out to great effect over the last decade. And so Joe is no stranger to large organizations, and so excited to talk about some of the issues that come up and how we navigate and do our best work in the innovation landscape. So Joe, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so we were just talking about some of the challenges around innovation and where we need to focus. And so I'd love to just go back there and hear some more of your thoughts.
Absolutely. For me, when it comes to innovation in the context of a large corporation, we have a lot of well-meaning individuals that tend to act in silos, right? So it's more often than not, a lot of really smart people are acting in good faith on some of the same, problem spaces. And thematically, I think what we see are similar solutions, but with varied degrees of outcome because different people are able to maybe appeal to different audiences or different stakeholders with varying levels of effectiveness. And in the work that I've been doing recently, I've seen a couple different models of innovation play out. One is where innovation is kind of more embedded in or otherwise woven into the fabric of the corporate culture. In others, we have kind of like standalone innovation labs or innovation organizations. And in others, we have kind of a newer model of rotational labs, which I know a couple different institutions are currently experimenting with. So it's a really kind of interesting confluence of factors that lead to what I would call like enduring or sustained innovation versus, like a once in 5 years disruption.
Mm. And yeah, so let's talk about some of the trade-offs between sustaining innovation versus disruptive, and how do we place the bets if someone has an idea that they want to push forward, that is that a useful way to categorize their idea, and how are companies invested in one versus the other? This is all fascinating stuff to me.
Sure. So for me, I think an objective definition of what innovation is really, really important.
Mm.
And by that, I mean to say that there's a difference between a big, like 3 to 5, 5 to 7 year horizon bet versus something that, it needs to be done. It's kind of like a safe innovation. So for instance, at a partner advisory board or at a customer advisory board, there's going to be a level of awareness of things that that the market would demand or that competitors are delivering on that need to be done, right? It's just a question of timeline versus something along the lines of an integration of an emerging technology or a set of net new capabilities that could be either disruptive to the market or allow for disruption of an incumbent. And I think that companies that do well on innovation are figuring out a way to either parallel path those two or kind of divide up the resources that are going to be required for delivery of either.
Interesting. I wanted to maybe double click on this notion of objective, and I think that it's important to quantify the work that we do, because a lot of innovation tactics and whatnot tend to fall in the qualitative land, the generative land, the land of the novel, and let's be exploratory. But if we don't quantify, we don't measure, then that also gets us in trouble. To quote one of my heroes, Drucker said, "What gets measured gets managed," right? And so, so how do we manage innovation? What's the operations of innovation? So when you mentioned the objective or making an objective, that really lit up some excitement for me.
Well, I think that there are certain models that are more driven by an acceptable degree of loss tied to that the risk of allowing people white space and that freedom, right? So you have like an 80-20 rule in that proportion, which I think Google and other large corporations are really comfortable with. And that level of comfort and that level of freedom comes with an environment where employees are empowered to have that drive, and in fact, it's baked into their core principles. There are other companies that hedge a little bit with annual like hackathons and things that to me feel a little bit more like well orchestrated forced fun. Like everybody gets a T-shirt, and we're kind of not mandated, but we're expected to form these multidisciplinary teams and work really, really hard for 18 hours straight, and the results of which are kind of it's questionable. I mean, one or two things might come out of that make for a nudge, or maybe if properly invested in, gets spun up as its own product. But those to me seem a little less genuine. They are still a force for good, don't get me wrong, but I think that in certain cases those are more for morale purposes than like a genuine willingness to undertake that degree of risk.
And so, yeah, go ahead.
Well, the other thing, just to add to that, I hear often is there are these moments where you have the opportunity to ideate and think about new ways of doing work. And then you spend time and effort into making those ideas become something. But going beyond that and actually moving outside of just the free time to do this kind of innovation work and thinking, it's very difficult for companies to articulate, what's allowed to move forward, what isn't, when there isn't a gated, forced fun moment. And I'm just curious on how you unlock that on teams. Like, how do you encourage people to think that even when there's not a clear path forward, how do you kind of embrace a mindset or tips or tricks to like go beyond the ideation part of it and make these ideas happen within your company?
Absolutely. I think within the context of a larger institution, it's really, really important to make sure that it's not a quote unquote design-led effort, or it's a tech-led effort, or a product management-led effort. It needs to be multidisciplinary. And that doesn't mean that you need buy-in at the highest level. That means that you need a representative from each of the constituent kind of partners that are part of a team in order to march something forward or move something forward. And the reason why I firmly believe so is that if it's seen by only being driven by one discipline, I don't think its chances for success are anywhere near as high as if it's a collaborative effort. I'll say in addition to that, nothing works better than a pilot, and nothing speaks better than a prototype. And it doesn't matter if the idea is really strong and you have a low fidelity prototype, or the idea is really weak and you have a high fidelity prototype, right? Like, you have to think about the context, you have to think about the audience. So I would say, to me, it's definitely more of a recipe than an equation that results in any meaningful innovation. So I think people have to think about audience, company size, as well as what the appetite and the willingness would be to move forward with something. Sometimes we need a paragraph, other times we need a prototype. But I would say that if you want to increase your chances of success, working with partners outside of your discipline is going to help with that.
And what have you found to be the best ways to identify the right partners and how to prioritize or even how to sequence some of those conversations?
Um, to me, it's coming from the design perspective. I like to look for people that are willing to work differently, to take a chance. Anyone that is anyone that has the interdisciplinary respect inside of an organization is a good person to go to, as opposed to someone that doesn't want to like get out of their lane. I think the traditional notion of stay in your lane, only do the thing that we hired you to do, is a bit outdated. And I feel like anybody that has a proclivity to steer out of their lane, and that has a voice in a meeting that speaks up with a perspective that's influenced by or driven by data, I think is somebody that I really want to bring in and collaborate with.
I love that. I think the swim in your lane, we hear that often, and people that are early in their career are feeling that, right? Like I was hired to do this work. And one place that I advise is rock out what you're hired to do, and then you can start to veer out of your lane, right? Like if you start to lose trust or fail in what you were hired to do, then what gives you the permission to go beyond that? And so I love the idea of, if you're established and in your career for a bit, you're rocking at your day job, and so you can take on these extra side projects and opportunities.
Yeah, I feel like when we veer outside of our lane, there's also the notion that it is monolithic, right? Like any sort of comments that I might make on product management, for instance, as a designer, can be mistaken for completely veering out of my lane, when sometimes I'm just like turning on the blinker and letting people know that I'm kind of thinking outside my lane. And other times, I might veer across 3 lanes of traffic and get to that off ramp. In which case, like I'm gonna pivot my career, right? Like I'm gonna go into a sibling discipline, or I'm gonna go all in, and I'm gonna take a stand on an issue that isn't traditionally associated with my discipline. So I think for me, thematically, it's objectivity over subjectivity. It's alignment, but it's also trying to make sure that like things are categorized the right way, and that we're clearly communicating what our intent as well as what our interpretation of a goal and a mission statement are.
Yeah, that's interesting. Both the point around categorization and this notion of taking a point of view that's not usually the responsibility of your discipline. And I think that is pretty innovative in itself, because if we discover connections to things and concepts that aren't typically in the purview of our discipline, it doesn't necessarily, that's can be difficult terrain to navigate, but it can lead to some really truly transformative results, because we're starting to explore uncharted territory. And so I'm curious if any stories come to mind there, or any words of wisdom you can share around noticing that there's opportunity. It hasn't been done before. Whether it's recategorizing things or challenging the categories or what have you.
I think for me, what's been really important is that at least for me personally, not being overly dogmatic and process driven, I think is really important. And I understand that in large organizations, people tend to gravitate toward a process because it results in a repeatable outcome. That's a healthy thing. I understand that, right? Like you want to build a system there. But I'll say that some of the best work I've ever seen brings inspiration from the outside in, and wants to constantly like iterate and experiment with things. And I think that the more we're open to outside ideas, and the more that we embrace different ways of working and different approaches to delivery, we end up with varied results, but those are oftentimes better because they come packaged differently. And I would encourage anybody listening to this to take opportunities to shift their perspective and view things through a different lens.
Yeah, that feels like a very timely comment that in the moment that we're living in. So thank you for that.
Absolutely.
Thank you for joining us today.
Yes,
thanks
so
for having
much.
me.
It's been fun chatting.
For anyone that wants to check out our book, Start Within, you can find it on Amazon, and you can find Joe, Douglas, and I all on LinkedIn and follow us for the work that we're doing. And if you're a person who is doing this kind of work, innovating within a company, a nonprofit, a government agency, and you want to share your stories with others so we can feel inspired and learn from you, reach out to Douglas and I. Thank you again for taking your time.
Thanks for the opportunity.